the end of the 1st century AD, the soldier Tiberius Claudius Vitalis crossed the river Danube and reached the end of the world. Trained to obey, he went. In the war to come, victory would hang upon such discipline. The greatest weapon of the greatest army the world had yet seen. At the height of its power, Rome, the greatest nation in the world, was paying tribute to barbarians. From their mountain strongholds north of the river Danube, the Dacians gnawed at the empire. 2 Roman armies tried to crush them. Both were crushed. An entire region simply vanished. Rome tried to buy peace, but the Dacians broke the bargain. Now the new emperor Trajan took up the sword and called up his legions. 100,000 men, 1/3 of the Roman army. One of the legionaries who followed him to war was a 30-year-old veteran, Tiberius Claudius Vitalis. As a boy of 17 from Rome, Tiberius swore an oath to the emperor. Ever since, his home had been the army. He had already given his youth to his country. A dozen more years of service of the 25 he had promised loomed before him. When he signed on, life in the army had beguiled him with status and adventure, and regular pay. Now he was tempted by survival. Of every 2 legionaries he marched with, 1 would not live out his term. Somewhere within its empire, in trouble spots from Britannia to Judea, Rome was forever at war. In the beginning, conquests had been made by part-time soldiers. By the time of Christ, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, rested on the swords of the legions, an army of professionals. From a village of mud huts on an Italian hillside, Rome itself had become the greatest city in the world. The capital of 1 million people, ruling an empire of 60 million. This was the world through Roman eyes. A civilized land surrounded by barbarians who never ceased to bay and scratch at its borders. Tiberius was stationed on the frontier where the barbarians barked loudest. Legion 5 Macedonia took its name from the place it was founded, but now his troop was based below the river Danube, the border between Roman civilization and the Dacian wilderness. It was to put down such uprisings that men like Tiberius were trained. The Jew who observed legionaries in Judea discovered the key to their success.
They do not wait for war to begin before handling their arms, nor do they sit idle in peacetime. But as if born ready armed, they never have a break from training. It would not be far from the truth to call their drills bloodless battles, their battles bloody drills. That is why they stand so easily the strain of battle. No indiscipline dislodges them from their formation. No panic incapacitates them. No toil wears them down. So victory over men not so trained follows as a matter of course.
When young Tiberius enlisted, he spent 6 months drilling twice a day. Mock battles with wicker shields and wooden swords, twice as heavy as his real weapons, and wielded just as harshly. "13 years later, he still drilled daily and ran 3 miles. 3 times a month, he slogged through a route march, a 20-mile trek in full armor and equipment, no matter what the weather. The legionary earned his nickname of Mule. When Tiberius set out to meet the Dacians, he was weighed down with weapons and armor, but also axe, pick, saw, cookpot, 3 days' rations of grain, 70 pounds in all. His legion was accompanied by all the professions a soldier might need: blacksmiths and bookkeepers, veterinarians and doctors. Directed by their engineers and architects, the legionaries began the war against the Dacians by building. Taking up the tools of stonemasons and carpenters, they erected a chain of forts to guard their line of supply against Dacian raids. Behind these walls, men like Tiberius, city-bred, immersed themselves in the comforts of Rome. They were encouraged by their officers in martial pastimes. Yet they indulged the vices of all soldiers: drink and dice and other diversions. Marriage was forbidden, but in practice, legionaries found wives, or mistresses, among the locals. Along the road down which the men just came, letters went back, mundane and melancholy.
Send beans, chickens, 100 apples if you can find nice ones, 100 or 200 eggs if they are for sale at a fair price, fish sauce, olives. Gracious to Veldeus, his brother, an old messmate. Very many greetings. And I ask you, brother Veldeus, I am surprised that you have written nothing back to me for such a long time, whether you've heard anything from our elders. Best wishes to our sister. Solemnis to Paris, his brother. Very many greetings. I want you to know that I'm in very good health, as I hope you are in turn. You neglectful man, who have sent me not even one letter. I've sent you socks, 2 pairs of sandals, and 2 pairs of underpants.
As a dozen legions gathered across the Danube, the Dacians withdrew to the mountain fortresses that ringed their capital. The legions prepared to follow. Trajan summoned his officers for a final council of war. The men sacrificed an ox, a sheep, and a pig to the gods. Priests read the entrails for omens. The Romans crossed the Danube in 2 great columns, one led by the emperor himself. Like his men, Trajan too sought glory in battle. The legionaries hacked their way through the first enemy they met, a forest ill-suited for travel, much less for the Roman way of fighting. At dusk, they became builders again. As the Dacian spies watched, the legionaries fortified the ground they would sleep on.
Whenever they invade hostile territory, they rigidly refuse to do battle until they have fortified their camp. This they do not construct haphazardly. If the ground is uneven, it is thoroughly leveled. Then the site is marked out as a rectangle. In the gaps between the towers, they mount spear throwers, catapults, stone throwers, and every type of ordnance, all ready to be discharged. The fortifications completed, the men go to their quarters unit by unit in a quiet and orderly fashion. Nothing whatever is done without orders. All other duties are carried out with attention to discipline and security. Wood, food, and water, as required, being brought in by the units detailed.
At the far end of a long day, the 8 men in Tiberius's squad pitched their tent and prepared a Spartan meal. If they were resourceful, they supplemented this with whatever they could catch. Then most bedded down. The unfortunate few took up their watch, and woe to him who fell asleep. If he were lucky, he would simply be whipped by an officer. If not, he would be stoned to death by his comrades. After many days of slow progress, the 2 long Roman columns, stretched out for 20 miles, met at Tibiscum. Trajan sent his cavalry ahead to find the enemy and flush out ambushes. These horsemen, like the other auxiliaries, the archers and slingers, were recruited from conquered tribes. Only citizens of Rome could serve in a Roman legion. But the prize of citizenship could be won by the foreign-born upon their discharge, if not sooner, for bravery. Near the pass of Tapai, the gateway to Dacia, Trajan's horsemen found the entire Dacian army drawn up. The emperor gave the order for battle. After weeks of cutting trees and building forts, the legionaries relished the chance to fight. Tiberius went into combat better armored than any soldier of his day. The mail worn by his predecessors had been replaced by the lorica segmentata, a breastplate of metal sheets connected by hooks and straps and conforming to his joints. When he moved, so did his armor, unless rusted by rain. His iron helmet protected his face and neck without obscuring his vision. Tiberius took his position on the battlefield. His unit of 8 formed a squad. 10 such squads formed a century, commanded by a centurion. 6 centuries formed a cohort, and 10 cohorts formed a legion. No such discipline prevailed opposite Tiberius. The Dacians wielded long scythes and made room to use them. Within their horde, each man would fight alone, even to the death. Tiberius might fight heroically, but not singly. He was part of a machine, To the 7 men beside him, he was friend and comrade. To the Emperor Trajan, this squad was like one creature, trained to obey, without delay, without question.
So complete is their submission to their superiors, that in the field the whole army is a single body, so knit together are their ranks.
As the Dacians brandished their weapons and hurled their jeers, Tiberius and his comrades silently advanced. He flung his pilum, his javelin, at the enemy. The neck was long and thin, so that wherever it struck, in wood or in bone, it buckled so no Dacian could fling it back. Then, wielding his gladius, a short sword with a wide blade, Tiberius met his foe. Slashing and thrusting, both sides fought until they could fight no more. Then, by agreement, they rested. Again, they came to blows. So it went, until the Dacians turned and fled into the forest, an obstacle that broke up the Roman formations and the pursuit. The legionaries had won the battle, but not the campaign. They had failed to take the Dacian capital. With winter approaching, Trajan marched his army back to winter quarters below the Danube. En route, Tiberius and his comrades sold their prisoners to the slave traders who followed the army. In the spring of 102 AD, Trajan again crossed the Danube. This time, he sent one column far to the north to attack the enemy capital from behind. Abandoning the field, the Dacians retreated into their strongholds, whose strength would now be tested by a Roman siege. Trajan brought up his artillery, ballista firing arrows, and catapults hurling stones, not to dent the Dacians' battlements, but to clear them. Under the barrage of missiles and the hail from slingers and archers, few Dacians dared show their heads, so few saw what came next. Holding their shields overhead, the legionaries advanced toward the walls in the tortoise-like formation they called the testudo. Within it, Tiberius was almost blind, but nearly invincible.
To such a great extent were they perfectly protected, that both javelins from above were received as if on a roof, and stones large enough to fill a wagon do not break apart the bond, but rolling down by the momentum, fall to the ground.
Under such onslaughts, so purposeful and so relentless, the Dacians' strongholds and finally their capital were taken. Their king signed a treaty of peace, and just as quickly broke it. For this second affront, the Romans so punished the Dacians that they would not mock Rome a third time. Tens of thousands of prisoners were taken, and, as elsewhere in the empire, the conquerors came to settle among the conquered. When in time they left, Dacia had come to be called Romania. A legionary's odds of surviving 25 years of service were at best even. If he did survive, he would be granted a farm carved from land he had fought over. There he might live out his days in comfort and honor, bearing his scars to family and neighbors, and recalling his hours of peril and moments of glory. For their valor, the bravest of the legionaries were rewarded with armbands and medals. More honors lay in a higher rank or a better posting. Tiberius was among those so favored. He was promoted to Legion I Italica, one of the most prestigious units in the Roman army. How his life ended, by accident, disease, or the sword, is not known. Only that it ended early. At age 41, 1 year from retirement from the service of Rome, he died.